welcome back. So in today's video, I am going to be reading you a spooky story. Oh my. I actually found this in a book of my daughter's that she had in her room, and it's a book full of true ghost stories. Ooh, spooky. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for us, it does not have an author. It doesn't say who it's written by, so I can't give that person credit. But fortunately for us, there's no copyright. Yay! So I can share the story with you. You may hear paper sounds like this because I am reading out of a book. And I do want to mention one more thing before we get into the spooky story. I am reading this on the weekend with my family here because I am a big scaredy cat. I'm a huge scaredy cat, and I can't read things like this when I'm home alone. I'm such a big baby when it comes to scary stories and stuff like that, but I really enjoy scary stories. So if you hear noise in the background, just ignore it because it's not a ghost. I hope it's not a ghost. Hopefully it's just my family. So hopefully they don't make any noise that's too distracting, but I just wanted to give you a heads up before we get into the story. Anyway, so I hope that you enjoy it. The title of this story is Lesson Learned. For 12-year-old Andrea, the worst part of living with a ghost was that she knew she had caused the haunting with her own thoughtless actions. The second part was that she had to keep everything a secret. Andrea had always lived happily with her parents in their perfectly ordinary, ghost-free house. Then, one fateful summer evening, the girl did something very foolish, and that night her carefree life vanished. Fear replaced happiness. The trouble began innocently enough when Andrea and two girlfriends decided to take a shortcut through the local cemetery. If the girls had just kept walking, it's unlikely that anything bad would have occurred. But, as sometimes happens, one thing led to another. For a joke, Andrea gave the friend walking next to her a bit of a shove, just hard enough to put the girl off balance. While she was trying to steady herself, that girl bumped into the third girl who had been walking nearest to the graves. "Cut it out," the third girl yelled as she steadied herself. "You nearly pushed me on top of that grave." Andrea must have been in a devilish mood because she laughed at her friend and teased, "Scared of the dead, are you?" With that, Andrea and her friends began chasing one another around the cemetery. As they ran, the three youngsters became less and less careful about where they ran. Soon they were scurrying across graves, jumping over small headstones, and hiding behind larger ones. Eventually, they tired of their game, and that was fortunate. After all, they know better. They knew they were being very disrespectful to the souls of the people buried there. That night, hours after she'd gone to bed, Andrea awoke from a deep sleep. At first, she wondered what had wakened her. Everything was quiet. Nothing seemed to be wrong. That is, not until her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Then Andrea could see the image of an old man sitting in a chair across the room. She gasped and buried her face under the covers. A moment later, as the comfort and warmth of the blankets began to lull Andrea back to sleep, she decided she hadn't really seen an image at all, that she must have only dreamt it. But the next morning, the old man was still sitting in the chair across the room from Andrea's bed. Is he real? Andrea wondered. She rubbed her eyes, blinked several times, and shook her head to try and make the image disappear. It didn't work. The strange man just sat there. He didn't move. He didn't even say anything. He just sat there, so still that Andrea thought she was imagining him. She grabbed her robe from the foot of her bed and put it on before getting out of bed. Once she was out of her bedroom, the girl felt much more confident. Wow, what a realistic dream I had, she thought with a sigh, and she wandered into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal. Then Andrea saw the man again. He still didn't say anything, but nonetheless managed to terrify the girl by floating around the house behind her. That's what finally made her realize that even though she couldn't see through him, her bizarre visitor must be a ghost. For a moment, Andrea stood holding her cereal bowl in front of her and staring at the apparition. She tried to be calm, but her heart raced. Then, the image beside her dissolved into nothingness. That morning at school, Andrea made a point of asking her two girlfriends if everything was well in their lives. Both girls nodded and turned the question around to Andrea, who told them she was fine except maybe for having a bit of a guilty conscience about having been running all over people's graves in the cemetery. Before her friends could respond, the school bell rang, and the friends didn't see each other for the rest of the day. At dinner, Andrea was sure that she saw the ghost floating through the dining room as her family ate dinner. She didn't say anything about it to her parents, though. After all, she could hardly tell them, "I think that our house is haunted by a ghost whose grave I disturbed while I was acting like a jerk with my friends." Later in the evening, Andrea's father asked her to make a pot of tea. When she lifted the steaming kettle from the stove to pour the water into the teapot, she felt something twist her arm. The boiling water very nearly spilled. As she took a deep breath and steadied her hand, Andrea was sure she saw a human-shaped form wearing an old-fashioned dress disappearing out of the kitchen. Now she knew there were at least 2 ghosts in her home. The girl wondered how much more of this she was going to be able to bear. What was going to be more difficult, she wondered, living with ghosts following her around or telling her parents what she had done. After making the tea, she watched the slightly transparent apparition of an old woman join the old man's spirit in the hallway. Then Andrea realized that she would have to gather her courage and tell her parents that their house was haunted. Worse, she would have to admit that there was no mystery about the ghosts. She had caused the problem with her own foolishness. But before Andrea had a chance to explain the situation to her parents, the haunting became worse. The family was quietly watching television when Andrea suddenly started to speak in a strange voice. She announced to her parents that she was the daughter of a French doctor and that she had been born in 1851. Nevertheless, the strange voice and words coming out of Andrea's mouth terrified her parents. They rushed her to the hospital, but none of the doctors could find anything wrong. By then, the voice was quiet, and Andrea was just as bewildered as everyone else about the uncontrollable words that she had spoken. It's possible that the disturbed spirits enjoyed all the trouble they were causing, because by noon the next day, they were appearing to Andrea's mother as well. The man's image even reached out to hit the woman, but his ghostly hand went right through her body as if she wasn't even there. There was more than enough for Andrea's That was more than enough for Andrea's family. They had no desire to live in a haunted house, so that very afternoon they decided to make plans to move. 6 months later, when Andrea was visiting her friends in the old neighborhood, she happened to walk past her old house. It was clear that no one lived there. Something about the place drew Andrea to it. Slowly she walked toward the house and around to the back door. Oddly, the door was open. The girl walked into the back hall. Instantly, she shivered from an unnatural cold that surrounded her. Then she felt two invisible hands wrap themselves around her neck. Choking badly, she tried to get away. Then seconds later, the phantom hands released the girl and pushed her back out the door into the warmth and fresh air. Andrea never told her parents about her last encounter with the ghosts. She also never showed any kind of foolish disrespect to those who had already passed on to the afterlife. Okay, so that was the story. Now I know it's not a scary story, but ghost stories scare me, okay? But think about the story that I just read to you, and then, that it's a true ghost story. It's true. Like, that's terrifying. To me it is. I don't know how terrifying it was to you, but to me it was quite scary. So I definitely did not want to read that story when I'm in a house alone by myself. But anyway, so I hope that you enjoyed that story, and let me know if you want me to read any more true ghost stories sometime this month. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.